Today on the podcast, we get to interview Will Harris. Will Harris is a fourth-generation cattleman who tends the same land that his great-grandfather settled in 1866. Born and raised at White Oak Pastures, Will left home to attend the University of Georgia's School of Agriculture, where he was trained in the industrial farming methods that had taken hold after World War II. Will graduated in 1976 and returned to Bluffton, where he and his father continued to raise cattle using pesticides, herbicides, hormones, and antibiotics. They also fed their herd a high-carbohydrate diet of corn and soy. In 1995, Will made the audacious decision to return to the farming methods his great-grandfather had used 130 years before. Since, Will has successfully implemented these changes, and he has been recognized all over the world as a leader in humane animal husbandry and environmental sustainability. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation with Will, so let's get into it. Hold up, one more thing. If you have not yet scheduled your 45-minute free exploration call to find out what the root cause of your symptoms are and your next steps to getting symptom-free, you are going to want to pause this podcast and go do that right now. So I invite you to go to nutritionwithconfidence.com, book your free exploration call, and find out how to get your results and what is possible for you.
Heads up that I made a bit of a recording mistake here and didn't record my video, so you'll just be hearing my... Well, thanks for taking the time to be on the podcast today. To get going here, I wanted to have you share a bit about your journey in a nutshell from being having more conventional practices at your farm to more of the regenerative, holistic practices that you currently engage in.
Yeah, I will. Thank you for having me on your show. So my great-grandfather started this farm in 1866 and farmed it all his life, followed by his son, my grandfather, who farmed it all his life. And the way they would have farmed the land is a lot of different species of farm animals. They processed on the farm, slaughtered animals. They got up, they and their employees got up before 6 days a week and slaughtered something. Might have been a cow, might have been 3 hogs, might have been 100 chickens, might have been some turkeys, but they slaughtered something. An employee took it on a mule-drawn wagon to Bluffton, a little town here, 2.5 miles from the farm, and then basically peddled the meat, dropped it off at different boarding houses and residences and stores. My grandfather would ride a horse up on Saturday morning and collect for what they unloaded. My dad took over the farm post-World War II. He was born in 1920. So in 1946, he took over the farm. And he very much was a driver in the industrialization, centralization, commoditization that defines farming today. He ran the farm as a monocultural cattle operation, nothing but cows, and as opposed to a lot of different species. And he didn't slaughter animals on the farm. He sold cattle to the calves to the feedlots in the Midwest. So a dramatic change in direction for the business of the farm. I went to the university. I was raised under my father's tutelage, and I never wanted to do anything except run the farm the way he did. And went to the University of Georgia, majored in animal science, came back and ran the farm as a very industrial, monocultural cattle operation for 20 years. And was successful. And I was fortunate enough to inherit a paid-for farm, a paid-for herd, no debt, nice farm, nice herd, little money. And I was able to make money. I paid taxes every single year. I went back and looked. In the mid-90s, I became increasingly disillusioned with that business model and started moving it and reached the point we are where we are today. We raise cows, hogs, sheep, goats, rabbits, poultry, and the garden and honeybees, and we process everything here on the farm, and we sell it. We sell it. We don't sell it all locally. We sell it all in 48 states, but we wish we could sell it locally. But the interesting part of that story to me is how the farm has gone back to a model resembling what my great grandfather and grandfather did a lot more than it resembled what my dad and I did. And I didn't do that intentionally. I just started moving away from that monocultural destructive model, and that's why I wound up back there.
And will you share some of the experiences you had that led to that I don't know, just a bad feeling, or what was it what were some experiences that made you shift from a monocultural operation to the regenerative approach that you currently have?
It actually started out, it evolved, but it started out as an animal welfare issue. I really felt good about my animal welfare. You know, I was raised believing that if the stockman kept the animals well fed, well watered, in a comfortable temperature range, and didn't intentionally inflict pain and suffering on them, then it was good animal welfare. No, that was good to go. Couldn't ask for any better. And I came to realize that all of that is incumbent upon you. You got to do all that. But above that, you've got to give the animal the opportunity to express instinctive behavior. And the industrial model doesn't do that. You know, cows were born to roam and graze, chickens were born to scratch and peck, hogs were born to root and wallow. And the industrial model absolutely does not allow for that. So I started out on a welfare issue, but it almost immediately evolved into the environmental side of it. And then much later, evolved into the local rural economy consideration.
Could you expand more on that piece of what was happening in the local economy and that shift?
So I should tell you that Bluffton, I'm sitting in the middle of Bluffton right now, and Bluffton's in the middle of my farm. So I'm in the old courthouse, literally the 100-something-year-old one-room courthouse, which is my office. But Bluffton had been a nice little town up until about 1900, and not a big town, 400-500 people, but a trade territory that probably had 6, 8, 10,000 people in it. And but it started the town started declining in population and becoming increasingly impoverished, and continued to do so until very recently. And I know, and my parents were aware of it. That started, it really started post World War II. The population peaked in 1900, but the real decline started after World War II. And that's when the industrialization, commoditization, centralization started. And that's not a coincidence. Bluffton has always been a purely agrarian economy. We've never had a railroad, never had a factory, never had a manufacturing plant, purely a farm town, never had a railroad. So when the industrialization started, Bluffton just became poorer and poorer. All farm towns did. Some of them were fortunate enough to not be completely dependent upon a farming economy, but Bluffton was, and it just went into decline. And by the time I was born in 1954, by the time I was old enough to see what was going on, it was in decline. And I never considered that I could do anything to help that situation. It was just the way it was. And I can remember having a guest here. I don't even remember who it was. I can remember having a guest here. We were in Bluffton, and I'd been at it for a few years. He looked around and said, this is a nice little town. And I was waiting on the punchline. And he meant it. And I looked and I said, you know, this is becoming a nice little town. But what had happened is I had gone from having 4 or so minimum wage employees to having, at that time, maybe 100 employees that made well over the county average. And they needed a place to live and eat and sleep and drink and play. And I built it. And the town came back without me intentionally bringing the town back. And it was just an eye-opening experience. And it really became one of my passions. And now my passions are animal welfare, regenerative land management, and the rebuilding of this local economy. And we've made, I think, great progress in all 3 areas. I'd love to show you the town. Next time you're on your way from Oregon to to Southwest Georgia, come let me show you.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's something that we talk about a lot because as a nutritionist, I'm always trying to teach my clients that nutrition has more to do about where their food is coming from and how it's made and grown and raised. And I think the connection between the ripple effect of what you can do for your own health and then you growing this business, and then increasing the economy of your community, it's a huge ripple effect of really kind of like a more sustainable, healthy, happy community, is what you've just described in your process, which is
Well,
awesome.
it's incredible. If you Google it, you can look and see. It'll tell you any number of sources of what percentage of the consumer dollar the farmer gets. And I think it's about 15 cents, maybe a little less of the consumer dollar goes to the farmer. Well, here, if I sell you food direct, I get 100 cents of that dollar. Now, I got 170 employees and I've got a payroll of $100,000 every Friday. And I've got a lot of other expenses, but the money stays in this local economy, doesn't get sucked out by a large multinational food company. And that's important. And that's how you resurrect rural America.
That's amazing.
And Will,
Yeah. Go on.
I was curious if you could talk more about post-World War II, the rise of industrial agriculture, the rise of monoculture farming. What were the main variables at that time that led to the rise of a lot of what's wrong with our
Sure.
agricultural system today?
So a factory is very linear. The raw materials are going in one end and a finished product is coming out the other end through whatever processes have got to be done, but it's very linear and it's very easy to scale up. If it's working well, you can put another line in and another line and another line and just really ramp up production. Farming is very cyclical as opposed to linear. And it doesn't scale up nearly as well. The scale, it's highly replicatable. You can have another farm over there, another farm over there, but it's not highly scalable. Yeah, we are White Oak Pastures is well beyond the size I thought it would ever be, and it may be beyond the size it ought to be. I mean, I don't think growing this is not on our discussion list of discussion. Starting another one is not on our. It's highly replicatable. Somebody else can do it somewhere else. And we could talk a long time about why that's true, but that's kind of the answer to your question, I think.
It reminds me, my dad and grandpa are both marriage and family therapists, and they have a practice in Scottsdale, Arizona. and they've had a number of businessmen approach them about expanding the practice, to other states. And ultimately, they've ended up in the same place as you, as growing is not the direction to go, because it seems like once systems grow to a certain size, then in my own language, it seems like there's a disconnection that can happen between the owners and in your case the landscape, or in their case their clients. And it seems like there is something there about systems working better when they're just smaller. I don't know.
Well, I was a solid C student when I was at the University of Georgia. I mean, a B was not in me, and an A certainly was not in me. But I was a solid C student. But I view things differently from a lot of people. But for me, certain things are just clearly very linear. Certain things are clearly very cyclical, and I see the error of trying to force one system on something where in a place it doesn't belong. It's just so clear to me. I'm not, a C student, but that is just very clear to me.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it makes me think about how you had to structure the regenerative agriculture business. You said that you ship to 48 states, right? So is that a necessary thing, or can you talk about examples of how difficult it is to make a profit? It seems like the previous way, the conventional way of farming, the industrial agriculture, was focused on profit only. And so that linear scaling gets there faster. But how is it? I feel like it's similar to how it's difficult to make a profit. And like you're saying, it's more of a cyclical process. How do you do that well?
Profitability is truly a problem. I can tell you that we've probably got $30 million in assets here and probably 10 million in debt. So about $20 million in interest-free working capital that's involved in the farm. And we've been doing it a long time, and I think we do a pretty good job. But it's still a very break-even-ish company. I mean, if we didn't have a lot of interest-free working capital, it wouldn't work. And it's a very low return business, and it causes you've hit on a very important point here. In business today, if you go, if you the business courses you take in college or any business discussion you go to, it's all about the monthly report, the quarterly report, the annual report, and the return on investment and how well you're doing. And that is not the way this works. It's a multi generational business. And I might have mentioned we just had a family meeting here. We have one every Friday. It's over now, and we don't spend much time talking about profitability. We need to know we're able to pay our bills this month. That's very important. But when we talk about making an investment, we don't talk about whether or not it'll pay for itself this month or this year, or this quarter, this year. We talk about generationally, this is something we need to do. And I've been in business other than this, and that's just unheard of in a corporate boardroom. When I sit with my friends who are CPAs and CEOs and MBAs and show them my numbers or talk about my numbers with them, they say, why would you do it? Why would you do that? And the fact is, I think what I'm doing is great. I mean, I'd love for there to be a greater return on investment, absolutely. But what we're doing is fine. We feel very good about it from the generational perspective. But if you're judging it from a normal modern business plan, it's just, you wouldn't make the investment.
Right. It's better to think of in terms of like 100 years investment, right? Like what is it going to give future generations instead of the short-term
Yeah.
profits?
And it's the way farms used to work. My family's been on this farm for 1866, was that 140 years or something, 50, whatever it is. Arithmetic was not good for me.
Yeah. No, you're in the ballpark there, 160, I think.
Yeah. So, and when you're looking at that sort of time frame, then it's a whole different deal than if you're looking at the monthly report. We got a controller, and she generates a monthly report for us. We just went over it, and it don't matter. I mean, if we can pay our bills and we feel good about the direction we're going in over a much longer time frame, then it's fine.
Yeah, that's so refreshing. A shift from a focus on profit margins to focus on future generations. What are you going to be giving your grandchildren, great grandchildren? What are we leaving behind? Because it seems like a lot of these monocultural practices where we're just tilling and depleting so much soil, there is a limit to what the land can take in terms of these practices over and over, and eventually it seems like we're ultimately screwing over these younger generations.
And most businesses are stock companies. In a stock company, you can get in today and out tomorrow, and back in the next day and back out. And I mean, it's highly fluid, highly flexible, and it's a different mindset completely.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Will, I'm curious to get into a bit of your practices. So, coming from this animal welfare perspective and realizing that your practices at the time were ultimately not ideal for your livestock and shifting, then what will you talk about some of those early changes that you made on the farm?
Yes. Probably one of the hardest things I ever did was give up my land grant university perspective on managing animals. I thought that I had to have a lot of little different herds segregated by age, gender, whether I want reproductive, what I want to do. Just I had I guess we probably had about probably 700 mama cows at that time, and I had many herds. I just got them in little smaller herds, segregated intentionally based on some criteria that was important to me that day. And I didn't move the animals much. They kind of lived in the paddocks that I had them in because I had so many of them. So I probably, if I had 700 cows, I probably had 20 herds, and I may not have had much over 20 paddocks. And I thought that was wonderful. I thought I was doing it great. And when I changed my mind, I realized that the most important thing I should be doing for the land is constantly moving that livestock. So and this was very painful for me. Well, first thing I did was painful is I built about 100 and something miles of fence because I wanted no more land, but I wanted it chopped up. And today, this farm is 3,200 acres. It's divided up into 150 something paddocks. And then I dumped more or less dumped the cows all into 3 herds, and which were 3 large herds, and we rotate them every day, 10 months a year. 2 months a year we feed hay, and we'll not move them so often when we're doing that. But it was just incredible to me what that did for our land. First of all, The cattle generally did better after I got it figured out. But the land was the big improvement. My land went from 1/2 of 1% organic matter to 5% organic matter. 10x, over 5 actually, so over 10x increase in organic matter. And organic matter is not all that matters in the soil. That's what we talk about it a lot because it's measurable. I mean, there's a lot of stuff you could talk about, but it's a great indicator of soil improvement. You know, 1% organic matter will absorb a 1-inch rainfall. That's about 27,000 gallons of water per acre. So if you've got a 5% organic matter, it'll absorb a 5% rainfall. Now, not if it comes in 30 minutes, but if it comes over a week or something. So it's just incredible what it's done. And I don't have the numbers to quote to you, but the microbial diversity in the soil increased similarly. The number of species of plants I was growing out there increased similarly. And all the other good indicators that the cycles of nature are operating optimally were happening. And that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about building the farm so that the cycles of nature will operate optimally. And when they do, they spin off an abundance. And that abundance is how we pay our bills and build equity in what we got. You know, all that coal and oil and natural gas under the ground that we've been pumping out since the early 1900s. That's the bounty of nature from the era of the dinosaur, when the ecosystem was rocking and rolling. I mean, it was operating optimally, and that's how all that wealth, that energy got stored in the ground. And that's what we're doing now, except we're not storing it in the ground for future fuel. We're eating it.
Yeah. So I heard you talk about like some main, I think 4 or 5 main benefits. You said diversity, like plant diversity, as well as soil microbiome diversity. Water management improves, and the cows are happier and healthier. And we actually are building soil as well.
Yeah. So the cycle, we're talking about the cycles of nature.
Yeah.
And the cycles of nature are the energy cycle from the sun, the water cycle from the rain, the microbial cycle, the energy cycle, the grazing cycle, the mineral cycle, on and on. Cycles probably that we don't even recognize. But when nature is operating optimally, and all those cycles are operating at full tilt, that's when you generate this abundance that is wealth. And it may be the only wealth there is.
Yeah, the price that we put on food is more than just the dollar. There's all of these other benefits that are valuable in nature that we don't put a dollar sign on, right? We can't put a, right?
Absolutely. And I think of it exactly right, but I think of it a little differently. I think of it as the food production system that feeds us today spins off costs. You know, the food I sell costs more than industrially produced food. I wish it didn't. I'm sorry. I wish it didn't, but I can't help it. But it's not because mine actually costs more. It's because costs are spun off. You know, the Gulf of Mexico is about 80 miles from here. And there's a dead zone down there that's bigger than the state of Massachusetts that was caused by pesticides and chemical fertilizer and other tools that would wash down the river and killed all, and it's a dead zone. It used to be a thriving oystering region, and now it's a dead zone. Now that cost billions of dollars. But the food that was produced by that fertilizer and the pesticides That won't pay for it. We'll all pay for it. You know, I think a lot about extinction of species. You know, I believe, a belief I have is that every species in an ecosystem that evolved in an ecosystem has a function there. We may not recognize it. Sometimes we recognize it. You know, earthworms, you know, the benefit there. We can talk a lot of butterflies, honeybees. We can see a lot of benefit. But I believe every species in that ecosystem that naturally evolved there has a role in the operation of that ecosystem. And when we drive that species of plant or animal or microbe into extinction or near extinction, there's something that it used to do that is either going undone or having to be done differently. And we have driven countless species into extinction. I don't think we even know how many, and we're still doing it. And I can see that difference. And I can see the less ecology in my ecosystem than there was. You know, I'm pretty old, but I can remember when there was more going on. Now, right here on this farm is pretty good because we've protected it. On and on. There's just so many costs in the commodity industrial food production system that are spun off. And that's the reason food is so cheap.
That makes a lot of sense, because I think, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the point of regenerative agriculture is to prevent desertification mostly, right? Can you explain more of what is going to happen to our farmland? Like what you're seeing is happening, actually, it's currently happening, and with an industrial farm.
I'm glad you mentioned desertification. I think that's really when this land went from 0.5% organic matter to 5% plus organic matter, that's the opposite of desertification. And when my dad and I started farming it industrially, we desertified it. I mean, it had, I don't know what organic matter it had. It would have been more than 5.5, but it, whatever it had, and more species and more. But we use a lot of tillage, a lot of chemical fertilizer, a lot of pesticides, and we desertified the land. And that's what we're doing almost everywhere in the world. And that won't end well. I don't know how that's going to end, but that won't end well.
And Will, I wanted to track back to that shift you made to moving your cattle around the farm. Where did that idea come from? How did you decide to start rotationally grazing your cattle?
You know, it just you know, I never had an original idea in my life. You know, I heard somewhere somebody was doing it, and I don't remember where, but it made sense to me. So I did it, and you know, I had to build 100 and something miles of fence, and I had to put in a lot more sophisticated watering systems, and I had to do a lot of things that cost a lot of money. So it was a really big investment for me. But it's just if I had to pick out a single best thing I've ever done, that may be it. You know, it's emulation of again, nature. You know, the herd cattle are not indigenous to the United States. I might be happy if I was dealing with an indigenous species, because I do believe in that, but I'm not, and it's what I got. You know, herds of bison used to roam from the Canadian border to the Mexican border, you know, just back and forth. Every day, huge herds bunched together by predators. They bunched together tight for protection, and they move slowly because the grazing animals move slowly, and they drop the parasites were dropped out the back end. They didn't come back for a year, so there wasn't a lot of problem there. There were no mineral troughs out there for them, but they were moving X miles a day, so they were grazing an area that may be high in potassium today and high in zinc tomorrow. And so they were, it was just a much more natural, symbiotic way of animals and land both benefiting. And let's not forget the land benefits. So this land would grow up in high, mature grass. The animals would bite it off. They manure back down, urinate back down. And here's something people don't appreciate. I don't know if it tickles me or infuriates me when I hear people talk so much about, pontificate so much about cattle destroying the environment. Well, I got the big tip for you, just quietly. When this land moved from 0.5% to 5.5% organic matter, it was because of grazing. And that grass would grow to a height of maybe 18 inches, 2 feet. And if it's 2 feet of grass up here, there's 2 feet of roots down there. That's the way that works with perennial crops. The animals would come through, graze it off short, and that would cause those roots to slough off. Wouldn't kill them, but they'd slough off, marooning carbon in the ground. And the animals would urinate and defecate and drop carbon back. Now, yes, they blew off some carbon dioxide and other gases, but they also left a lot of it in that decaying plant matter, root matter, manure. That's, again, we've gone from 0.5% to 5%. So this the plant's like a carbon pump. It's breathing in these greenhouse gases, putting up foliage and roots. Animals bite it off. Some of it goes back up, but most of it stays down. So it's just a beautiful system. And I respect the vegetarian and vegan choice. I respect it. But now don't tell me that cattle grazing properly are destroying the earth. Don't tell me that.
And Will, could you speak a bit to the study that was actually done at White Oak around carbon sequestration and the findings?
I will. So I was selling product, beef, pork, lamb, to a company. I'll tell you the name of the company in a minute. It's got to come back to me. But it's a small, privately owned natural meat company, and they got bought by General Mills, and they got a lot of money, and I was proud for them. That was great. But I assumed I wouldn't sell General Mills anything else because it's a big multinational company, and I'm not. But they did continue to buy from us. They didn't buy much. They bought some. And but the vice president of marketing, I believe he was, came to see me one day and said that the Epic was the name of the company. Epic was making claims that they didn't feel comfortable making because they didn't have any paper on the file showing that it was true about the earth and that's one. So he asked if I would participate in a scientific study called an LCA. That stands for life cycle analysis, I think. And he hired and I was willing to do it. It was $80,000 study that they were going to pay for. And it cost, we had to do some work, but it didn't know out of pocket costs. But it was a very expensive, time consuming, problematic deal. But he agreed to pay for it. He sent a company down here called Qantas. It's an international company. And they sent really smart people, environmental engineers of all sorts down here. They did all kind of testing. And what it found, the result, and those people weren't here to make me look good. I mean, they were scientists. They were purely interested in data. They weren't trying to hurt me, but they weren't trying to help me, which is fine. But what they find, and I wasn't worried about the results of the tests because I could see the difference in the soil. I could see dirt and soil. I mean, it's very obvious to me. Would be to you too. But what it showed, what their study showed is that we are sequestering, their words, sequestering 3.5 pounds of carbon dioxide equivalent for every pound of beef that we market. And that's pretty incredible. We're a carbon sink. Not only are we not contributing to greenhouse gases, we're part of the cure.
I love that. Sorry, I just get so excited.
And I'll tell you the rest. So the rest story is, of course, when they published that, other groups said, no, that's not right. They took issue with different things, and they had big urinating contests back and forth about it. But at the end of the day, nobody said, oh, well, they're not sequestering carbon. They just argued about how much.
Yeah.
Wow.
And Will, earlier you're talking about the importance of the cow manure and urine for the soil health. Could you just get into a bit more detail about why that's so important for farming in general?
Yeah. I can take a lot of different tacks with that question. The one I think would probably be best is, do you know what dung beetles are? So
Yeah.
when I was a kid, we had dung beetles. I used to see them all the time. Didn't think about them. And then at some point, I just didn't see them anymore. I didn't miss them. I didn't think about it. But I just hadn't seen a dung beetle in God knows how long. And of course, I was giving my cattle medicinal worm control on a very regular basis. And what I now know is that the wormer that we gave the cows would go through them and come out the manure, and that manure was toxic to dung beetles. So if the dung beetles would try to colonize it the way they do, they die. So the dung beetles had just gone. I mean, not most of them. I mean, I hadn't seen a dung beetle in forever. I mean, in fact, when I quit using the wormer, I didn't do any of that, but I decided I didn't want to use those pharmaceuticals anymore. So I quit using wormer. And I can remember I was driving through the pasture in my Jeep, and I saw where dung beetles had worked some fresh cow manure. When they work it, there's dirt and fresh dirt in the top of it. They dig down in there. They dig an 18-inch vertical shaft, and they pack it with the most nutrient dense part of the manure. But they lay the eggs in the bottom, and then that neonate, that baby worm, when it hatches, eats its way out, and it's a dung beetle, and it goes and does it again. That's the life cycle. So I was just shocked to see those dung beetles and didn't realize it was because I'd quit using wormer, which had, so I've forgotten what the question was, but that is
Yeah, the importance of the manure for
okay.
the soil, and yeah.
So that manure is a great contributor to that moving that organic matter from 0.5% to 5.5%.
Yeah.
And manure is like it's like currency. I mean, it's wealth. It's just manure is good shit.
Totally.
I probably shouldn't say that.
I like it.
I remember learning about on the Oregon Trail, like the people would prize the cow patties because they would be able to burn it and it was like fuel, right? So yeah, that's energy that can be used into the soil and it's just going to get transferred. It makes me also think of that cycle of you tried the pharmaceutical wormer and it had this negative effect. And earlier you had talked about how every creature has a purpose. And I have the same perspective with the microbiome of our human gut microbiome, right? So when I work with people and they have parasites, I'm like, wait, maybe we shouldn't just go kill these parasites because they're doing something for you. let's figure out what they're doing and try to help that alleviate that problem so we don't have so many parasites causing problems.
I think that I believe every indigenous species has a role in its ecosystem, and I, that that means you shouldn't kill anything. And I can't say I can't say I live up to that fully, but it's my philosophy, and it's the opposite. I used to every day I went to my pasture and I was looking for something to kill. I was looking for an insect or a pathogen on my plants or a illness in my cattle. I was I was I was really good at using pesticides. Side means kill, homicide, kill people. Pesticide kills pests. Insecticide, nematicide, fungicide. I was in the killing business, and now I'm in the keeping it alive business. And again, I'm not a perfectionist.
Mhm. That's amazing.
Well, in your book, you talk about how nature is not neat and tidy and uniform, and that leapt out at me because I walk around, the condominium complex we live in, the suburbs I grew up in, suburbs around our house, and there's just this it seems like a result of the ethic of control. I think so many parts of people in our society want things neat, controlled, and at the same time, when we're all in nature, when we're in the forest, there's not that control, right? There's this messiness, but there's beauty in that. I'm wondering if you could just speak a bit about that concept and what that looks like at your farm.
Absolutely. When I was farming industrially, I wanted nothing but Tifton 85 Bermuda grass growing in my pasture because Tifton 85 Bermuda grass is a hybrid that can absorb a tremendous amount of chemical nitrogen. And I was put out a lot of chemical nitrogen to grow a lot of grass, and I wanted a monoculture of cattle out there eating it. So if you were in my pasture and you weren't Tifton 85 Bermuda grass or a cow, you were the enemy. And I wanted to kill you. And now, it's very different from that. I think that every species has a role, and my pastures are there's an expression that says if somebody's got a bad looking crop, like an unkempt crop. It says, looks like the mule died and the plowman ran away. And that's old from the mule farming days. That expression is still used. And now in my pastures, it's just a lot of stuff growing out there. And some of it, purple verbena is growing out there. And purple verbena is toxic to cattle if that's all they got. But in a pasture that's got a tremendous amount of species growing there, my cows, I see them eat a little purple verbena. And I believe there's something in it that's good for them. If they were starving and there was nothing but purple verbena, they would eat all of it and they die. That's all they would eat and they die.
Mm-hmm.
Nature's beautiful.
It really is. And it's so interesting. I have watched a number of YouTube videos of Greg Judy. I don't know if you're familiar with his work. He's a rancher as well, doing regenerative practices. And I forget the specific type of perennial grass, but I guess there is some debate as to whether it's good for cattle. But he in his videos he's saying this is what my cattle love. Like they just eat, and but the scientific community kind of questions that. But yeah, what you're saying, if the
Fescue,
diversity,
fescue, fescue.
fescue, that's it exactly.
Fescue has a microbe called endophyte that grows on it, and it can be toxic. But I agree with Greg that if it's a bunch of stuff growing out there, Yeah, I occasionally will lose a certain size calf, about a 300-pound calf, a certain time of year to a plant called coffee weed. It, I don't know the scientific name. And I only lose those 300-pound calves, not a lot of them, and it's only a certain time of year. And I'm pretty sure it's the ones that ate too much before they learned better. I mean, there's a bunch of them out there, but I don't lose but one or two. And I think that if you happen to be that unlucky calf that ate too much coffee weed uh, before you learn that it's not good for you, it kill you. And as a result, we try we try to see it and mow it at that time of year, but sometimes we're not able to get all of it.
Mhm. Mhm.
Well, and I'm curious when that happens to a calf, what do you typically do with the carcass? Are you able to butcher it and use it or no?
We all of our mortality like that goes into our composting operation. I should tell you about that.
Yeah.
We slaughter animals on the farm every day. I've got a red meat slaughter plant and a poultry slaughter plant, and we generate about 9 tons a day of poultry, excuse me, processing waste. They call it. That would be eviscerate, gut fill, feathers, heads, the non-marketable. We sell a lot of bones, but some bones that aren't marketable. About 9 tons a day. And we compost it. We've got a really big composting operation, and we take the carbaceous material would be wood chips or peanut hulls that we're given, and the meat material from waste from our processing plant, and we compost it. We got a guy that runs it, and he takes the temp every day and does what needs to be done to be sure it stays hot for so many days. Then we let it sit for a year, and that is to, if it sits a year, you can spread it in 6 weeks. But if it sits a year, it'll be more fungal and less bacterial. And I'm told that's better. I believe it. And the bones become more porous, so they break down better. They don't flatten a tire. You fix a lot of Jeep tires if you throw fresh bones out of it. But we spread that on the land. I'm not licensed to sell it, so I don't. I use it myself, and it's but anyway, the mortality goes in there as well. Although I'll say this, we have far less mortality than you would think. I mean, the way we raise animals now, we just don't. I'm not saying we never have an animal get sick, never have one die, but it's just not. It's not much.
What you said about the more fungal than bacterial for the compost is really fascinating to me because when I work with clients, we do a lot of microbiome shifting. And in the second, it takes a while. It's not a fast process for one. But in the second year, I often see a lot more yeast and fungal symptoms in clients. And it seems I have this working hunch that like like fungus are going to take over the world in a way, or they already are the network of the world and our soils. So it's kind of like a returning to how things should be, maybe. I don't know what you think about that. And
Well,
funguses.
I certainly don't know anything about the human side of it, but I do know that in nature, when an animal dies, the scavengers will eat what they want out of it, and the rest of it will lay there and return to the soil. And what we do is an imperfect version of that. Now, let's be clear, everything I do is imperfect. It's all imperfect, but it's an attempt to emulate nature. And I think it's really the right thing to do. And certainly it's what's allowed me to move this land from the dead mineral medium it was to the living organic medium that it is.
Mhm.
And I'm so struck by what you're doing there because it is closing the system. A lot of these bigger farms are importing, chicken manure for fertilizer or any sort of other fertilizer, and there's just so many steps to make that happen, carbon emissions to make that happen, whereas you are able to, take death that happens at the farm and use it to then continue to feed the soil and grow that topsoil.
And all of that is all of that you just mentioned is part of that study that Qantas did, that life cycle assessment.
Hmm.
And I'll tell you another so similar to that is come here. Sorry.
Oh, no problem.
I told I'm doing a podcast. Okay. The I lost train of thought. Similar to that,
Oh, yeah.
this imperfect emulation of nature. I told you that my cattle operation is meant to loosely reflect what buffalo did, moving all the way up and down across the whole continental United States, north and south. And when they did that, today they might be in an area that was high in one nutrient. The plants were high in potassium, phosphorus, copper. And then tomorrow it may be completely different. So they were able to balance their diet by moving, roaming, eating. And White Oak Pastures, 3,200 acres, is only 4 miles long, about a mile wide. So they're not able to get that, and it's coastal plain, which is not nearly as mineral rich as you'd find in the Midwest. So minerals are important. Minerals are something that's got to be addressed. And what we do is we have a cafeteria mineral feeder. And there are a couple of land grant universities that think it's a good idea. And there are a couple of land grant universities that say it's not worth it. But I believe in it. Mm-hmm. And I build trailers for myself with 24 drums cut in half, and a different nutrient in each drum: calcium, phosphorus, magnesium, on all the way around. And the animals, and we move the cattle every day. We move the trailer every day with it, and I believe it's beneficial for my cattle for a couple of reasons. One is my animal health is so good; it's just really good. The cattle shine like new money. The other thing is I noticed that they will just hammer one nutrient for a period of time, and then they don't eat much of that anymore. They eat something else, and that tells me that they need. And a pregnant cow and a cow that's nursing a calf and a bull, they have different nutrient needs. So it just makes sense that they would vary. But most cattlemen do give a mineral supplement. It's like a one-a-day vitamin. It's just what they pour out there every day.
But yours is more of what they get access to, all of them, and then the cattle that they get to direct their own needs, or kind of supplement their own needs.
They get to eat what they want to eat, choose to eat. And yeah. I think that I'm a believer in nature. I believe nature tells them what they need.
Yeah, I agree. I see that with humans too, when we can get rid of all of the noise and brainwashing that we've experienced growing up with, you should eat this or that, that when we can get rid of that, humans have an innate knowledge of what they need, and they can figure that out and experiment and taste test, right? This is good. This is not good for me. I was wondering if we could ask you about the details of the water solution, because we were interested in grazing, but it seems like dependent on the land, doing the rotational grazing, you have to have water paddocks in each one, or you have to move the water, which is like very labor intensive. So how did you solve that problem in your?
Well, the way I solved it here probably is very different from the way you would solve it in a more arid region. But we're fortunate that we can drill a 70-foot well just about anywhere and get 15 gallons of water a minute. You know, just the water table is such that we can do that.
Yeah.
And that's really a good question. So that's one thing, just know that. The other thing is that when you put cattle together in big groups, it changes the dynamic of watering dramatically. You know, when I had a bunch of little bitty herds with small numbers of cattle in it, they could go get a drink anytime they wanted to, and it was fine. And they could drink out of a bathtub. It didn't have to be that big because it was not that many of them. But when I put together, we've got, right now, my biggest herd's got 1,700 cattle in it. That's a little over 1,000 mama cows and 700 and something calves. We just took the bulls out. And cows like that are like women in a bar. When one goes to urinate, they all go to urinate. And when it's time to go drink, we all want to go drink. So if you've got those big herds like that, you've got to have a lot of volume of water and a lot of flow for refill and a lot of linear space for them all to get around to get a drink. And we specifically build watering stations that are very expensive. It's probably situational, probably $25,000 to put in a watering station. And I've got 150 something paddocks, and I can't put in 150 something stations like that. So we strategically locate them so that one watering station will water 6, 7, 8 paddocks. So it's very effective. Works really well.
Awesome. That's genius.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that.
Well, it's imperfectly genius. It seems you really have to listen to the landscape and work with what you've got. And I love hearing all the different ideas, though, that people have.
Listen to the landscape, listen to the animals is well said. I mean, that's what you do. You know, I told you I was a C student, and I was not. I was a C student, and I think that set me up really well for doing what I'm doing here, because I didn't have this great thirst for knowledge in one area, siloed. I think that one of the things that's gotten us on the wrong track is siloed knowledge. You know, when I was at Georgia, I had a genetics professor that knew all there was to know about genetics, but didn't know anything about nutrition. And a reproductive guy that knew all there was to know about breeds and breeding, but didn't know anything about animal health, and on, just specialists.
Yeah.
And the guy that was trained to teach genetics at the land grant college in Florida next year might be teaching in Maine, and the next year might be teaching in Oregon, and the next year might be teaching in New Mexico. So there's a lot wrong with all that. And I think that one of the reasons this has worked for me is I'm a C student, and I love knowing a little bit about everything. I don't want to know too much about anything. And I think that is beneficial. When I first started, I'll tell you this is not very flattering, but I'll tell you, when I first started making the transition and understanding how this works, I would have experts visit me on the farm, university or consultants or whatnot. And I'd show them a problem that was a real problem. I'd say, so what do you think? And if he was an insect specialist, he would take it to insects. If he was a disease specialist, he would take it to pathogens. If he was a nutritionist, he would take it to, and so on and so on and so on. And it just, they weren't all right. You know, if you know too much about any one discipline, it's probably going to adversely impede how well you do this holistic management.
So wise. I see that in medicine, right? Like we have the disconnect of all the specializations and none of them are talking to each other. So, clients that I see, they have symptoms in all different kinds of the body systems and they are all connected. And if we don't take a step back and learn about each and every one of it and try to connect them, we're missing the root of it.
And Will, I was curious in your book you write about how one of your highest values is gumption and how I was curious, how did this value develop? It seems like it's really served you as you've made this transition, difficult transition that didn't always economically make sense, and others were kind of questioning the shifts you were making. But I'm curious, like how that value of yours developed.
Yes, that's a very interesting thing that happened to me. I was born in 1954, raised in a very rural place, and for whatever reason, gumption was like the primary attribute that people look for. I mean, you say, well, he is a great athlete, but somebody else had gumption. He is a great student. Somebody else had gumption. She's a beautiful girl, but gumption was the stick to it, get it done, make it happen. And I was raised to believe that. And one day, years ago, I said something about gumption, and the young person that I was with said, "What's that?" I said, "Gumption." And I had to explain it to them. I said, "You never heard of that?" And they hadn't. And this wasn't a kid. This was we have a lot of young college people, educated people working there. And I started asking people. My daughters had heard it and nobody knew what gumption was. And it's just incredible. Why the hell did that happen in one generation? But it went from being a real attribute of admiration, and that admirable attribute, to people not knowing about it. And I still just, it's incredible to me.
Mm-hmm.
And
How?
another question I had was, I think in the book you wrote about how your daughter ended up moving back to the farm after you'd kind of shifted practices, and I was curious if uh, was, did she leave because of the more conventional agricultural practices, and what led to her coming back to be at the farm with you?
Well, I'll tell you the story. Yeah, I can't speak to why who did what, but I'll just tell you the story. So I told you that I never wanted to do anything but run this farm. Never crossed my mind. When I was a kid, my friends say they wanted to be astronauts or baseball players or doctors or lawyers, and I knew what I wanted to do. And my parents did not want me to come back and run the farm. They thought that there was a better living to be made in town, and it didn't matter. It's just what I wanted to do. So, and they made me go to college, but I majored in college of agriculture, so I won. My daughters were raised very differently. My wife was a school teacher. We had three daughters, and they were girly girls, and I was farming very industrially. And I did not try to bring them into it. I wasn't trying to keep them out of it. They were gone to dancing lessons and singing lessons and piano lessons and gymnastics and softball, and I didn't need them. So that's the way it worked. And when I redirected the farm to go in this business, it was not to bring them back. That was not a consideration. I did what I wanted to do for the reason I told you earlier I wanted to. And they were kids, and they got time to go to college. They all three of my daughters graduated from college. And my oldest daughter never intended to come back. She was a school teacher like her mama. Jenny is gay, and she was figuring that out about the time she graduated. And she told me that she wanted to go to Atlanta and get a job, and I didn't want to come back to the farm. And I said that's good because it's not an option. I didn't want her back on the farm. The farm was doing okay, but I wasn't ready to generationally commit to on a business that new. This is the meat business. So she went to Atlanta, got a job with a company called Buckhead Beef. It was a meat company. I helped to get the job. I was doing business with them. And she decided she was gay, and she decided that living at some point, Jenny's very clever. She said, she came home one weekend, and she said, we were just talking about all different things. She said, you told me I had to go to Atlanta and go to work, and I'm glad I did. I'm enjoying it. But how long, what's your vision on that? I said, I don't know, at least a year. I hadn't thought about it. And I didn't know I was being asked a question that was going to be recorded. But, so she said, okay. And time went on. And she came home one Friday afternoon. I was in my office. We didn't have but one office at White Oak Pastures at the time. That was mine. I was on the phone. She walked in, and she was just very theatrically looking for something. So I got finished with my phone call and said, what the hell are you looking for? She said, the place to put a desk. We got to do something here. I said, what, a desk? She said, yeah. You told me I had to work in Atlanta a year, and I was there 50 weeks today. So I gave notice. I'll be back in 2 weeks.
Clever.
And she did. And it's worked out great. And then my other daughter, my youngest daughter, wanted to come back. And I did the same deal with her. I told her, you got to go work somewhere else for a while. And they did, and I think they're both glad they did.
Yeah. What is it like a day on the farm with 6 generations of the Harris family?
Well, there are only 3 generations here now.
Oh yeah.
All my predecessors are gone.
Right. Yeah.
I got 2 daughters on the farm, and those 2 daughters have 5 babies who are my grandbabies. And they're young. They're all kids. And everybody's got a different day. I mean, I got a really good job. I love what I do. I'm in the office. This is my office, and it's nobody's office but mine. I told you it's the old one-room courthouse, and I don't share with anybody. And I'm an only child. I'm not good at sharing. But I'm in here probably a third of the time. In the pasture, about a third of the time. In meetings and those kind of things, about a third of the time. And I used to have to travel a lot. I try not to travel much anymore. I'm physically able to. I just don't enjoy it. I'd rather be here.
I would too, if you could just walk out in nature and be a part of the cycles.
I got a good job. A real good job.
It's good.
That's nice. And well, the last question I think I have for you is, I think a lot of people will listen to this and they'll really be excited about supporting ranches like yours. And I know you have an online store, so people could support a ranch like yours through directly purchasing some of your products. But what other ideas do you have about how, your average person listening to this conversation could support the regenerative agriculture movement?
I'm glad you asked that question. And certainly we do have a store, and we ship to 48 states. And I know you're in the Pacific Northwest. I'm not soliciting business in the Pacific Northwest. I appreciate it if you're gonna do it. But here's what's important. If this kind of farming gains traction, it's going to be because consumers want it to. It will not come from USDA. It will not come from big multinational companies. It will not come from the land grant university. I can give you a endless list of who it won't come from. If this form of this type of land management and food production and animal management is to prevail or to proliferate, it's going to be because consumers find them a farmer and buy from them. And again, we ship product to 48 states. I don't export intentionally, but 48 states. And I wish I could say I'm only going to sell within an X mile radius of White Oak Pastures. I can't do that because I got to sell $30 million worth of stuff because I borrowed a bunch of money to build processing plants and things and land and whatnot. But what I really want is for consumers all over the country who can afford to do it and who care to find them a farmer. And I'm going to say, get to know them. Now, you ain't got to go to the farm. It'd be good. You'd enjoy it probably and have a better understanding. But with the social media and all these things we've got, if you know you could go to that farm if you wanted to, and you know there are people going to that farm, I bet you there's 24 people on this farm right now, staying in my cabins, eating in my restaurant, buying stuff in my store, taking tours. And you could be one of those 24 people, but you haven't got to. You can know this probably being done right because there's 48 eyes looking all the time. And it could be your eyes if you wanted to. So find you a farmer. Closer's better. If you can't find one that's close to you, get one a little further away. I mean, just you got to start somewhere. And the fact is, now I probably get in trouble saying this, so I'll say it. There aren't that many of us in this country. And there certainly aren't that many of us in this country that's operating at scale. I'm not saying that small is not good. It's fine. I mean, people often say, I'm thinking about farming. What size should I farm? There's no size. There's no right size. But if you farm on a very small scale, you probably haven't got much to sell. So you can't handle many customers. So you as a consumer are going to have to find the best farm you can. That means as close to you as you can. They may not farm exactly like you want them to. You may have to influence them. You may have to say, I really wish you wouldn't use GMO. But it's a relationship business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you think that there's a lot of farmers like you or ranchers like you who are open to changing their practices and being influenced by the consumer demand?
Yeah, y'all ask really good questions, and I think that there are a lot of farmers. There are a lot probably of farmers out there that want to do this. There are a lot of non-farmers that want to do this. It's very, very difficult for the economic reasons I mentioned to you earlier. And it's even more complex than I told you. My friend, I'm the only one here that's farming this way. I mean, in my area.
Yeah.
And I've been doing it a long time, and people have seen me. It wasn't a secret. They saw me doing it, and they saw I was doing all right. But my friends and neighbors and relatives who farm here farm corn, cotton, peanuts. That's what we grow here. And you know, a cotton picker costs $1 million.
No.
And they
I
own
have no idea.
They own a cotton picker, and they won't do nothing but pick cotton. Yeah. And they probably own an interest in a cotton gin. A lot of these cotton gins have farmer participation. Mm-hmm. And they probably own interest in a grain buying point, and they probably own interest in a peanut elevator. So those guys are so financially committed to the commodity, and they're farming like their daddy did and their granddaddy did, and they feel good about it. It's what the University of Georgia said to do. It's what the county agent said to do. It's what the Monsanto rep said to do. And so it's just very difficult. And I think that the reason we hadn't seen, and another reason we hadn't seen a lot of people do it is I told you that it's a generational investment. You know, that's hard for people to do economically. It was hard for me to do economically. So there's a lot of things holding it back, and that's not going to get a whole lot better. But if consumers demand it, and also don't forget, there are a lot of poor consumers out there. There are a lot of really good people that can't afford to pay a little more for ground beef, or a little more for milk, or a little more. They can't. And we all want those people to eat too. So I'm not saying I wish all industrial farming was gone today. I'm not saying that. I don't want hungry people, you know. But the way it's going to have to work is the consumers who are sophisticated enough to appreciate the difference and financially able to pay a little more, or to pay the costs that are not being externalized, are going to have to do it. And that'll empower hopefully a few more farmers to do it than we've got today, and a few more the next day. And it's going to be a slow growth. When at one point, I thought that the change was going to be a tsunami. And now I see it as just being a bunch of little bubbles.
Yeah. It seems like it has to be that way. Like you said, it's such a our food system is so big right now and centralized. So if that was just to crumble, and we have to make a plan, or it's not going to be a plan and it's just going to bubble up, like you said, and be slow. But
it's going to have to happen. It's going to have to happen gradually over a longer period of time. And I just hope we got that time.
I hope so too.
That's
Yeah.
good. Well, Will, thank you so much for your generosity and time, and for being on the podcast. I've loved this conversation. In wrapping up here, if folks are interested in learning more about White Oak and your work, where's a good place
Here's your book
to direct them? Yeah, Natalie was
Here's the book.
holding up your book. Highly recommend the new book, A Bold Return to Giving a Damn. Where else is a good place to direct people?
You know, website, whiteoakpastures.com. You know, all the social media stuff. I don't do that much, but you know, Instagram and Facebook and all that stuff is White Oak Pastures. And I hope, you know, I appreciate anybody's business that wants to buy from us, but I most appreciate if you buy it from a farm. Just buy it from somebody.
Absolutely. Thank you again.
Yeah, thank y'all. Y'all did a great job. Y'all are very good interviewers.
Oh, thanks.
Oh, thanks.
And I just want to extend appreciation for what you're doing. Like your work and your whole family and team's work is, I think, just kind of at the center of what our society needs, both from an ecological perspective, but also from a health perspective, and a resilience in our communities, economies, and food security. So really appreciate the work you guys are doing.
It's interesting. I tell you, it's a small community. You know, I mentioned one farmer to you and you knew him. You mentioned one farmer to me and I knew him. I've been to his farm. So
nice.
Awesome.
It's a small community.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, thanks again.